Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
One of my go-to expressions is, in a marriage, disagreement is a given, fighting or arguing is a choice. And while my clients understand that conceptually, putting it into practice is not as easy as it sounds. And this isn't because they aren't making a real effort to use the skills I teach them. It's because of an automatic response that we all have that makes it difficult to access those skills when they're needed most. So what is this automatic response? And is there a way to override it? Well, those questions and more are what I'm going to be talking about today with my guest, fellow licensed marriage and family therapist and certified life coach, Linda Carroll. So, Linda, thanks for coming on the show. And we're going to be talking about something that when I first heard about it, it was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that my guests will have that, so that my listeners will have that exact same reaction.
Right.
So, and
it's hopeful. It's a very hopeful thing because it seems, one of the things I work a lot with couples in what I call loops, and loops are all about what happens when we become dysregulated. That's the word of the day, dysregulated. And understanding a way out of the loop is so hopeful because we don't have to be in that, but we often don't know what to do because we're stuck in this, the red zone or the loop. These are these sort of takeaway words that I find people find useful.
So, and it's interesting because, as my listeners know, I talk about the importance of communication in relationships ad nauseum on this show. But good communication skills are necessary, but they're not sufficient for keeping a relationship on track. And you talk about this. You wrote a piece called "Why Relationship Skills Don't Always Fix Your Relationship." Why communication skills don't always fix your relationship. And in it, and I quote, you say, communication skills alone can't stop arguments from erupting or escalating. So when I read that, I'm kind of going, okay, so how are they useful if they're not useful? If they don't stop arguments or keep them from building, why do we harp on them so much? So what is actually going on that communication skills by themselves aren't going to stop the arguments?
Well, okay, let me say something first about that because I think I'm an author. I've been a therapist for 40 years. It's mostly what I do is I work with couples. I teach classes, and I have been trained in all kinds of communication skills for couples, and I teach it. And when I first started, I thought that's all we needed was just the skills, how to do I statements and how to listen. But I think there are two things that we need. And the first is what I'm writing about in this article, which is what I call understanding when we go in the red zone. The second thing, I'm going to just be very quick about it, but I think it's really important, is understanding that your partner isn't you. And that one of the things in my book, Love Skills, I say in the beginning, and I say it in the class that I teach, is that for some people, there is a real pleasure in making I statements and in listening and in doing all of the things that all the books and blogs tell you to do. But often a person who is a communicator in that way is with somebody who doesn't like it, who would rather go for a walk or ride a bike or watch a tennis match. So that the first part about this is in understanding about how communication skills don't work, is that your partner or your mother or your sister or whoever you're doing this with does not necessarily not only communicate like you, but appreciate open-ended conversations or vulnerability. And so the first part of this is understanding you're not me. And so I may approach something with great curiosity, like, God, I yelled yesterday. Why did I do that? My partner doesn't approach stuff that happens with curiosity at all. He doesn't, he gets defensive. He doesn't want to hear it. He just wants to get through it so he can go for a bike ride. And I think that so the first part of communication skills is understanding that it's a huge, huge it's a huge canvas, and that for one person, communication skills is kind of a grunt. You know, where do you want to go to dinner? I don't know. I don't care, wherever you want. And for another person, communication skills means, well, I really liked the restaurant Thursday, but then again, that's not what you liked so much. And, you know, and I love the salad, and it's a whole, I wonder why I love the salad. It's a whole exploration. And so and we're usually not with somebody who's our clone. So understanding that your partner is going to approach the whole idea of communication and listening in a different way. So that's the first thing.
Okay.
And the second thing is that that there is a process that happens when we are stressed, and what that process is, it's that our old brain, we have a lot of different parts of our brain. We have chemicals in our brain, for example, that wash over us when when we're afraid or when we're anxious. We all know what those experiences are like, you know, and what happens when I remember one time when I was teaching at Rancho La Puerta, I was coming out of a building in Mexico, a place where I work and teach, and it was dusk, and there was no one around, and I was walking towards another building, and I was just having lots of thoughts and sort of zipping along, and I looked up and I thought I saw a horse. It was maybe 20 feet away, and then I stopped, and it was a cougar. It was a big cougar. And
okay.
Well, here's what I remember. I remember looking at that cougar and thinking, my brain saying that's a cougar. And you know what the next thing I remember is? I was in a building that I don't even know how I got from the place where I was standing and saw the cougar to the building. It was because my emotional brain shut off, and my ability I went into fight or flight. I went into a primitive reaction, and that's all I could do. I didn't think, what kind of a cougar? It's a beautiful cougar. I wonder if it's a male. I just reacted.
Like, get out of the reach of the range of that cougar now.
Exactly. And so I don't remember anything about that, Leslie, except I saw it, and the next thing I knew, I was in a building calling someone from security to say, you know, can you chase it back up the mountain? But sometimes if my partner says to me, you forgot the spinach, that if depending on the kind of state I'm in that day or that night or with him or in my own mind, it can feel like he's a cougar, and I can react in the same way. And for some people, they go into flight. For some people, they go into fight. For some people, they freeze. Some people we call it fold. And so there's a style I have when I feel triggered. I call it triggered, or when I feel like I'm in some kind of danger. And I mean, asking somebody about how their day went might not seem in this conversation like it's a dangerous thing. But if I'm very vulnerable and I'm feeling like my partner is criticizing me a lot, and my day didn't really go so well anyway, I'm not even sure if I'm going to keep my job, and then I go home and he says, how was your day? What that part of my brain can hear, we call that the old part of the brain, the reptilian part of the brain. What that part of the brain hears is what's wrong with you? You know, I'm going to criticize you. You didn't do a good job today. I'm going to hear something in that that's going to create a reaction to me. Whether the person means it or even is saying it is not what creates the reaction. It's what happens in me. And at that point, there's no conversation because I'm in fight or flight. Is that making sense to you, what I'm saying?
Oh, it makes complete sense to me, because it's happened, and it's one of the things when I work with my clients, you know, and they go into this, well, I didn't mean it, and they took it wrong, and blah, 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 and they just need to come. I'm going, okay, you're misunderstanding, right? You know, and I tell people, unless you have a video recording or an audio recording, don't get into who said what in what tone of voice, because you're never going to agree. It's just like,
right.
You're talking about we're different people, and what wouldn't bother me might trigger my partner. And so it makes so much sense, because when we get flooded with those emotions, we actually can't take in any information. So what happens if a couple actually tries to communicate or have a conversation when one or both of them are in what you call the red zone?
Well, okay, so this is how I give people an example, and I think just about every couple I know knows this. Mm-hmm. So you have something happens between you, and it's upsetting, and you go to bed. And person one says, I want to talk about what happened. And person two says, not tonight, I have to work tomorrow. Let's talk about it Sunday when we go out for dinner.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And person one says, what do you mean you have to go to sleep? We just had a really unpleasant experience. How can you go to sleep? And person two says, because I have to go to work.
Right.
And person one says, I thought you cared about the relationship.
Oh,
so
Lord.
it's escalating.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then person two says, why are you doing this? I can't do it now. And they become more distressed. And person one starts getting bigger, and person two starts getting smaller until they get up and leave the room and sleep somewhere else. So what's going on there? And people often talk about this because this is a loop that a lot of couples have, where one person wants to talk now, the other person wants to get away. Well, if we could define that in a different way and say, to keep my anxiety down, to keep myself from going into distress, I want to talk about this now. That's person one. Mm-hmm. My partner says, to keep my anxiety down, to keep me from going into distress, I am too upset to talk about it now. I need to get away from you. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I'll ask people is, who's wrong? And they always say, nobody's wrong.
Nobody's
wrong. So how do we negotiate this? So this is how I suggest people negotiate it. So if we're in this conversation where person one is wanting to talk about it now, and person two wants to say not now, they're actually being smart because they know that they're not going to be able to listen. Here's something you can do. The person who doesn't want to talk about it now can look at the person who's getting bigger and feeling more intense and touch them and say, sweetie, I really care about you and I want to do this. I'm just too distressed right now and I could make a mess. How about if we do it tomorrow at lunchtime? So you have it within 24 hours.
Yep.
You make a time when you'll do it. And you touch the person and reassure them that you care about them. And what do we know about pets, horses, cats? We know that being touched brings down that it helps the breathing get slower, and it brings down that part of our brain that feels that we're in danger. I mean, if you're in a good enough relationship, if you're mad at each other and the person touches you, that might not feel good. But for most people, that or the other person who is feeling desperate to talk about it, because that's going to bring my pulse down if we talk about it, can say, I know I know you don't feel comfortable talking about it, but I need to know a time when we're going to, because then I can calm myself. So you are each doing something that is acknowledging the other person's where they're at, and that brings down the heavy breathing. It releases some of the chemicals that go off when we're in danger, like when I saw that cougar, that those chemicals can go off when my partner says to me, I didn't have a chance to fill your car today and I used it. And I can suddenly be in some kind of place of just outrage and not fair and not be trusted to respond in a way that's, kind or civil. So the question that I think you asked earlier that's really important is, what do we do? Number one, we understand that there's something called a red zone. And the red zone is when we, see red, when we go into the old brain response and our partner says, you forgot the spinach, and what we hear is, you're worthless. I have to know this about myself. That's the first rule of communication, is know thyself. I have to know that about myself, that to know when I start to get like that, I need to back off and I need to say to my partner, I'm getting triggered. It's not you. Let me just do what I need to do to calm myself.
Yeah, I give my clients a temperature scale of 1 to 10. That 1, things couldn't be calmer, everything's fantastic, and 10, somebody's going out the second story window and I don't know who it is, and
wow, that's
and higher than a 6, you shut up. And my 6 may be different from your 6, but it's like, and if I'm at an 8, nobody wants to try to have a conversation with me. It will not go well.
I really like that. So that you start to look at that scale from 1 to 10, and you're first of all self-responsible. And Leslie, I really like that. Where am I right now? So the first question you ask, one of the things that I say, and people really seem to get this, is that the intensity of your need to talk about something right now is not related to the wisdom of talking about it right now.
Yes.
That the intensity with which you feel, and I think who doesn't know what it's like to get an email and you're just in some kind of mood where you're on the edge and you fire off a response and you hit send and then you think, what have I done?
Right.
And it's the same. This is the same thing, right? It's like the intensity that I feel like I've got to talk about it now. It's not related to the wisdom. What was your day like? And, just as a little sidebar, this is not just about disagreements, but it's also about if I've had a really wonderful day and all sorts of great things have happened and my partner comes in and the first thing I need to do is find out what their day is. If they've just had a fender bender, and they just found out they needed a root canal and lost their job and, had a terrible call with their brother.
Right.
And they come in and I say, oh, I've had the most wonderful news. I'm not going to get a response from them that's going to be honoring the place I'm at. So this is really about being mindful of what's my body temperature right now? What's the scale, like you say, from 1 to 10? And what's my partner's? And is this a time to try to share my best news? Because that's a painful thing when you have a great day, your partner has a hard day, and you say these wonderful things have happened, and they just look at you like, who cares?
Right.
And
my world just fell apart. I don't want to hear about it, right?
Exactly.
So I need to remind my listeners that this is Happily Ever After. It's just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking with fellow licensed marriage and family therapist and certified life coach, Linda Carroll, about how good communication requires more than just good communication skills. So if you've ever had a conversation with your partner go sideways and turn into an argument, you now have some idea of what's going on. But if you're truly committed to making these events few and far between, I can help. I invite you to take a moment and send me an email or give me a call to schedule your free, no-obligation, 5-star relationship call. You can reach me by phone at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. Or you can reach me by email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. And I want to get back to this conversation. So, Linda, I love you talking about giving that example about a couple climbing into bed, because there is that horrible piece of advice about don't go to bed angry.
Oh. Hasn't that damaged so many people?
It's like,
yes,
so you're tired and angry and arguing at 3 o'clock in the morning and doing all kinds of damage. It's like, I suppose that, the idea of trying to go to sleep when you're angry is difficult, but the solution is not to talk it out. It's to get your anger under control so you can go to sleep. But yeah.
So then it becomes go ahead. What were you going to say? It becomes, what do you say to yourself? If you say to yourself, and this is the other thing, what we're doing is we're doing case building against our partner. He doesn't have time. He never has time. He didn't have time to fix the garage door. Blah blah blah. We start going off into this whole case building experience, or when my mother never had time. What I say to myself at that moment is the most important thing that happens. So if I say to my partner, let's talk, what happened, I really want to talk about it, and he says, not now, blah, blah. If I say to myself, he never has time, that's not fair, and look at all I've done for him, then what's going to happen is my internal conversation, my communication with myself is going to go south. Whereas if I say to myself, this is hard for me because I'm a person who wants to communicate now, and I love talking about it. He doesn't like talking about it, and he's tired, and he's got to get up at 6 in the morning. So I've got to put my little nervous self on hold, say to myself, this isn't about love, honey. This is about him being tired, and he doesn't get excited with communication talks, you do. And so, and if we have an agreement that we've made before we're in the trouble, which is that we will talk about something within 24 hours, I can get even more calm with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I also advise to my clients, that if you please take a break if you find yourself getting hot and entering the red zone. Please take a break. But if you ask for a break, you have to give an alternative time, because if you never come back to have the conversation, they are never going to let you go. Ever.
That's right. That's absolutely true.
And
that's absolutely true. So we have to honor that, don't we?
Well, and it's, I mean, and I think that this is one of the biggest, I mean, you mentioned it, and I actually think it's the biggest challenge to creating any kind of a successful relationship, is recognizing that we are now, always have been, and always will be two different people. You aren't going to do things the way I do. The things that bother me may not bother you. The way I handle things is not necessarily the way you handle them, and it's not a bad thing unless we make it that.
Exactly.
And tell the story of, well, because they don't do this, they don't care. I can't remember who it was. It may have been Sue Johnson telling the story, but it was a story about a repair effort. And what the woman wanted was words, her husband to actually come up to her and say, I'm sorry about my part in blah, 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 blah. But that wasn't his style. His style was to come up behind her, put his hands on her shoulders, and kiss her on the back of the neck.
Yes.
And that was, and so, and so she wasn't getting what she, quote unquote, wanted, but she was able to say, to recognize that was his apology.
Yes, and she was able to make that good enough.
Yes.
Rather than it has to be the way that I want it to be.
Right.
Because if you loved me, there's that old idea. If you loved me, you could read my mind, you could know what I want, you could do what I want.
Well, and sometimes our partners can make requests of us. They can say, I would really like it if it would happen this way. But if I can't do that, if that's not something, this goes into the love language and things like that. It's like we still have to negotiate through that. Is what is acceptable? There's the ideal that if you were my mirror, if you could read my mind, if you did everything that I did, we would never have these problems. That's the ideal, right?
Well, I wouldn't be with you if you did everything I did, because I wouldn't need to be with another person. I could just do it myself.
Right. But we have this kind of weird expectation. But there's the ideal, and then there is the, and I'm not using this as a settlement question, but there is the good enough, that this is something that I can accept and recognize and embrace. And but when we get into that red zone, when we get triggered, it's hard to grasp those things, which is why I think you and I agree this is a conversation people need to have beforehand, right? Not in the moment.
That's right.
About how do we want to handle it?
No, because your brain's on fire. Yeah.
Right. And and being able to acknowledge and recognize what my partner does bring to the table, how my partner does respond in a positive way. It changes the lens that we're viewing it. So, I mean, we're just talking a little bit about having these conversations beforehand and taking a moment to check in with our partners, because I'm always a big proponent of asking, is now a good time to have this conversation? And then if the answer is no, what's a better time, as opposed to just jumping into the conversation without any thinking about it. But what other suggestions do you have about how a couple can avoid the red zone in the first place?
I don't have any, because I don't think we can. I think it's part of the human life. But I think what we can do is we don't have to make messes from the red zone. Mm-hmm. We can find ways, when we were in the COVID years, I mean, we're in them, but not the way we were.
Right.
One of the most common things that went on between people is the news problem. And so people are locked in a house together, and one person is very anxious about what's going on and wants to have the news on all the time. and the other person is very anxious about what's going on and doesn't want to hear the news, and they're in a 3-room apartment.
Right.
So how do they do this? What do they do? And what they usually would do when they got to me is they've been arguing about it, and they've been talking about their case. So I just wrote an article for my newsletter, and and the theme of the article was one of the reasons marriage counseling doesn't work. And what I talked about in that article was that often people come to marriage counseling because they want to show the other partner that they're right and their partner's wrong. And that I want to go in, I want her, and I've been in marriage counseling with my husband, and I've been a therapist for 40 years. I still do it too. When we've gone to counseling, what I have a secret hope is that the counselor will help him see that he's wrong. But I know that that's not really reasonable and that it's not going to work. And I have to give up the idea that my way is right, and that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means, as you said, we're two different people.
Yeah.
So I think telling myself that, and telling myself that it isn't, that I'm not wrong, he's not wrong, we're different. How can we help each other get what we want is really, I think, a very, very core piece of this. I wish you well-being. I wish you to get what you want. You're going to get calm listening to the news. I don't understand that because I just want to watch the birds and not think about it.
Right.
Or you're going to get calm watching the birds, and I don't get that because I need to know what's going on.
Right.
Neither of us are wrong. So how do we become advocates for each other's and protectors of each other's needs rather than fighting each other? And I think that those are the kinds of things you said. What do? Is you talk to yourself in a way that helps you remember that you're a guardian for the other person's well-being as well as for your own.
I love that because that is, to me, I think what makes marriage specifically, because it's a very particular type of relationship, so challenging is that it really is challenging us both to expand ourselves and be supportive of things we might not understand. It's like, how does your brain work that way? I don't get it. But instead of making you explain it, prove it, it's just, oh, this is how your brain functions. I mean, it's
right.
My husband and I do lots of word games. And he likes to do Sudoku. And I will do Sudoku up to a point, and I'm going, okay, I'm not going any further with this. I'm not enjoying this. I don't care. And he'll sit there and do it, and he'll get stuck on a word puzzle, and I'll look at it and go, oh, it's this. And it's just like, it's just the way it's just the way our brains are.
That's great. That's a great.
It's not better or worse. It's just they're different. And I just tell people nobody wants me designing their bridges because God help them.
That's right. That's right. But here's the thing: when we're under fire, we don't have. That's a benevolent, loving, kind thought. But when you're stressed out, you don't think like that because you're there in your own corner. When you're in that place where you're stressed out, the last thing you think about is how to be fair play. You think about how to take care of myself. So it's like I have to know that about myself, Linda, and I talk to myself. I mean, I don't say it out loud, but I do. I say to myself, you're upset now. This isn't a good time. Take a walk. Go outside. And I mean, to me, that really helps me is when I'm able to do that, and to know that I because I have to talk myself down off the ledge, as they say, because I get activated, and then I start doing all kinds of self-talk to myself about what isn't fair and all I did and all that stuff that some of us do. But I know I do it, and I'm in my own corner to stop myself from doing it because it's not for my greater good that I make my husband the villain just because he doesn't want to go to the same restaurant I do. And I also have a thing that I've been doing lately that's really been great where I remember when I had young kids and I saw an article called Catch Your Child Being Good. Yep. And I grew up in the era which you were supposed to catch them being bad. And it changed my whole parenting. And I spend a lot of the time thinking about how to catch my husband doing the right thing. And so we have a different relationship to order, shall we say. And he cooks, and I'm very grateful. But I don't like the way he manages the kitchen at all. And I have to work with myself all the time on that. Like, I am grateful. It is not going to destroy your life if he doesn't shut the drawers. Mm-hmm. And if the dishes are still in the sink. I have to talk myself down. And instead of saying, could you just put the dish away, I find myself saying more and more, I love that. It was so good. Thank you for doing that for me. And it calms me down. It doesn't mean you let go of everything. But for me, it means I choose carefully where I even want to ask them to do something different.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's, and I think that can be the source of a lot of tension, because we use ourselves as the template. If I do it and it works, then the rest of the world should do it the way I do it. Yeah, lots of luck with that one.
That's right.
But again, my partner's thinking exactly the same thing. And do I want to, and where there is room for adjustment, I think it's helpful to do that. But if there isn't room for adjustment, then, again, with my weirdness that my husband's learned about, I cannot rotate things spatially in my head. I do not have that ability. I've actually been tested. I'm very bad at it. And so and my husband has done like projects around the house, and he'll ask, I remember him asking me this question about, did I want a 1/2 inch overhang or a 3/4 of an inch? And I just looked at him like, you got to be kidding me, right? And so he went away and he goes, come upstairs. And he walked me into the room. He goes, which one do you like? And I said, that one. I didn't know whether it was a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch. That meant nothing to me. But when he could actually give me a visual, oh, okay. And so he's learned that about me. It's like,
yes.
It's like, don't say this to Leslie because she'll look at you like you have 3 heads. She doesn't know what that means,
Well, isn't it great that he knows that he does that too?
Yeah, I mean, but this is, but that's that same kind of thing where we're accommodating the differences, not fighting them.
Yes.
And what you're talking about also is finding the things, the good things, catching them doing something that is positive, because we all know about the 5-to-1 negative to positive ratio, positive to negative ratio.
Right.
That yes, we could make laundry lists of things that our partners do that we wish they didn't do, but we have to balance that out with the things that they do that we are so very grateful for. And I love you bringing that up. So can you share with people where they can learn more, find your book, find your writings, because you're a very wise lady.
Well, thank you so much. My website is Linda A. Carroll, Linda, initial A, Linda A. Carroll, 2 R's and 2 L's, .com. And I have a class coming up. I do an online class, which is really fun, a Zoom class. I've got a couple of books out there, so come to my website. I'm happy to talk. I answer all my emails, and I really appreciate this chance to talk to you. I'm so glad for the work you're doing, because you're doing such important work. And I really, really appreciate you reaching out to me and all the people that you touch. Because if we can do this how do we make the world better if we can't do it 2 by 2? And I always think this is my real anti-terrorist work is in my marriage. Mm-hmm. That's where I can be the worst terrorist of all. So I just see this as a soul-growing experience.
Well, I so appreciate you coming on the show. And what I want listeners to take away is that truthfully, one person cannot fight by themselves. You can be angry by yourself, as we've talked about. You can be hurt by yourself. But to have an argument or a fight, you have to have a willing partner. And if you don't want to fight, then taking steps to stay out of your red zone is the answer. And my question is, what would help you to do that? And I hope one of the answers will be to continue to listen to this show. And until next week, stay loving.